So women are natural leaders, are out there already leading. It's very turbulent times for Christians and for conservatives. Obama came in and he was so, at that time, common to have 100 or more women at these meetings. The Democrat state of Arkansas, home to Bill Clinton, and how the Republican women rebuilt the party after its worst defeat.
Welcome to In the Arena. I'm your host, Mindy McAlindon. Joining me today in the arena is Julie Harris. Julie has an amazing background. You will not believe the things that she has accomplished, from being a homeschool mom all the way up to being president of the National Federation of Republican Women. I think it'll be an exciting conversation, so join me. So let's start just at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your background, kind of where you grew up, and then what were you doing before you got so involved in politics?
Well, so I was born and raised in Denton, Texas, but I've lived in Arkansas for more than half my life. So, you know, it's home now. I mean, I still go home to visit family in Texas and call that my childhood home. But Arkansas has been home for quite some time now. My husband and I were small business owners, and many years ago, we just made the intentional decision for me to be a stay-at-home mom. It was a choice. It's the one thing, if I look back over my life and say, what's the one thing you don't regret? That is definitely something I do not regret, and loved every minute of it. Wasn't always just, you know, you've been a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
So, you know, you have your ups and downs, it ebbs and flows.
You mean it wasn't paradise every day? I don't understand.
Not every day. And you know, for stay-at-home moms, you may not feel like it's paradise at all. A lot of times it's not until later.
Yes.
And you're looking back that you realize, wow, that really was paradise.
Yeah.
Even when you have those challenging days, it really was paradise. And you can't go back and redo, and you can't go back and get more time. So just embrace. If you're a stay-at-home mom, just embrace it, because it will pass. It's only a season. And it was a blessed time. Didn't always know it at the time. Yeah. But now looking back, that was one thing we were grateful for. But the way we were able to do that is, you know, we were small business owners. We were in construction. It's what my parents did. It's what my husband's parents did. It was just kind of in us, in our DNA. And both of my husband and I both graduated from Bible college. And at one time I thought, maybe ministry or missions work, and didn't seem to be what panned out for either one of us. But in a way, it kind of was, you know, just being a stay-at-home mom, training my children up in biblical principles. It's actually what led me to get involved in politics. I tell people, when I look back many years ago, over 20 years ago, at what brought me to politics, it truly was just biblical principles. It wasn't necessarily in those early days Republican and everything, that the red and the elephants. It truly was just conservative biblical principles, and I haven't changed. You know, now we label what type of Republican you are, but many of us here in Arkansas, when Arkansas was still a blue state, it truly was our faith and our biblical principles that led us to the party. And so I wasn't really looking to get involved in the party when I did. I was just, like I said, I was being a stay-at-home mom, helping my husband as I could with our business, taking care of children. When I first moved to Arkansas, my oldest son was just 2 weeks old. He was our third child, had two daughters, and John Mark is just 2 weeks old. And I got a card in the mail from the Republican women welcoming me to Arkansas. And I was so intrigued by that. I you know, having a new baby, I was way too intimidated to get involved in anything, but I kept that card. I still have that card. I just put it in the door. Fast forward several years, I now have 5 children, and my youngest is about 3. My older daughters are doing a research. We homeschooled for 18 years, 5 children, and they all graduated from outside the home, but when you have 5 children, that's many years of homeschooling. And so we were homeschooling at the time, and my oldest 2 were doing a research project about government and the elections. And so we were collecting information from both parties and on all candidates. And that led us to a county committee meeting. And I know some states call them central committees, and there may be other names, and didn't know at all what a county committee meeting was. Never had heard of Lincoln Day dinner, and knew none of that. But at that meeting where we showed up to get some information that some of the Republicans had for us, told us to come to the meeting, I was invited to what they called, I believe they called it like a leadership training, which ended up being a phone bank. So I was just like, went in head first. It was being held at the home of the Washington County Republican woman's home, Norma Patterson. And so she had a way of connecting people and making them feel like that their contribution was the most important. And if they weren't there, we might not win. And so that was how I came in to the Republican women. Had Republican women like Rita Hamilton up there in Big County,
amazing.
Miss. And those were my mentors, and those were my examples, and they worked. I mean, we rolled up our sleeves, we went to work, and at that time, Arkansas was a very blue state. And the Republicans were not monolithic even then in how they believed and in how they thought and in who they wanted to support in primaries. They were very diverse, but we got along. I mean, we had to. We weren't going to ever turn this state red if we couldn't get along with those in our own party. And just slowly and with consistency and going out knocking doors and phone calling, we were able to turn the state red. And a lot of us who were here at the time know that Obama actually was a big factor in helping us turn our state red. And so that was kind of my entry into it. It was a kind of a natural Republican women welcome my children. It was a place where young mothers could fit in. I remember when I first came in, they even provided childcare at my local.
Wow.
My daughters grew up in it and then ended up becoming the babysitters for other children at that time. It was at the Old Clarion, and I don't know if you remember the Clarion Hotel down in Fayetteville if you were in Arkansas during that time. It's since been torn down, but that was where we would meet. And we were, for Arkansas to be a blue state, we were a very large club. I mean, it was not uncommon to have 100 or more women at these meetings, and keeping in mind that we were such the minority in the state, and especially in Fayetteville, because we would have our meetings in Fayetteville. We didn't have any of our county officials that were Republican. We had some of our JPs, but they were the minority. So things have changed. We flipped that now. We're every county elected, I believe, except maybe coroner's Republican, and we have majority on the quorum court, and we have all 4 congressmen, both senators, and all constitutional offices. So that has come from a lot of Republican women all across the state, and men too, working hard and taking advantage of when the we didn't, they talk about how Democrats they don't waste how does it?
Crisis.
What do we
don't let a good crisis go to waste.
Don't let a good crisis go to waste. Well, we didn't either when Obama came in, and he was at that time, he was so radical. Now we've seen much worse.
He's a moderate
he
now.
was so radical that voters in Arkansas were looking for a reasonable place to land.
Yeah.
I mean, we were the last holdout of the South. A lot of the South most of the South, maybe all of it, had already gone Republican, and here was the Democrat state of Arkansas, home to Bill Clinton. And so when Obama came in, I have said this before, Arkansans were just looking for a reasonable place to be, a place to vote, a common ground, and they found that with the Republican Party, and we were ready. We had that infrastructure there, and we were ready to embrace it.
And thank you for sharing that. I love hearing the story of the transition, because there are so many names that I know are people who I didn't meet. I came here about 12 years ago. I think you and I met maybe 10 years ago at the 16 convention was the first time that you and I ever interacted. And it is just, I mean, those were some giants, right? Dwayne and Mary Neal up in Benton County. Mary's the one who invited me to join the Republican women, and just such a gentle soul. And I love hearing those names and hearing what they did. And thanks for giving a little background. I really appreciate it. So let's talk about your involvement with the party, because when you said you went in head first, I mean, girl, you didn't let up, right? I mean, you went in and you just kept going. You have been really, in Arkansas, you have been one of the strongest, consistent voices I think, and I remember hearing you early on standing up even in executive committee meetings about things and making sure that we stayed on the path that we were supposed to stay on, which I really admire. So talk to me a little bit about just the different positions that you held within the state party, and then we'll move on to Federation of Women and talk about that.
Yeah, well, so it actually, it's funny. I have to always start with the very first position I was given. And Norma Patterson asked me to be volunteer coordinator for Washington County. I don't even remember which election it was. And now I realize that really wasn't a thing.
Oh, that's
she was just finding a way to plug me in. And from she was good. Yeah. And then I went on to be treasurer of the club. Yeah, I mean, I had very humble beginnings, and I felt honored. Every position that I had, whether it was with Republican Women or the state party, I felt very humbled that they would trust me. It was always an honor. Every single position I have had, I have considered it a very high honor. Even that volunteer coordinator position in Washington County. So I went on to be treasurer, then club president twice. From there, we had our Arkansas Federation of Republican Women's treasurer. I was serving on some committees. I can't remember exactly which ones now. It's been many years ago. But our treasurer for the Republican Women was going to Afghanistan. It was Melanie Gullick was being called back to duty. Yeah. And so I was asked would I consider running for her position. Again, I was so honored. And it was Becky Shepard who called and asked me. And I, was trying to, as women do, we try to consider others. So I was so excited that I was being asked. But I was like, well, Becky's or anyone else, if there's someone else, let them do it. If not, then I'm happy to step up and run. And she's like, there's no one else who wants to do it. And so I did run that one completely unopposed, but I loved it. And I considered it a great way to begin, because one of the best ways to start with an organization is the treasurer, because you're having to learn everything about it. And I was treasurer twice there. And it's been so many years, I probably should have looked up on my dates.
That's all right.
And then at the time was dealing with some very significant health problems. It was Trisha Green, and she had to step aside. And so again, they asked, I was asked, so far it has been pretty easy to step into all these positions. But again, I was also very honored, asked to step in, and did have to have an election, but ran unopposed and won, and then ended up doing 2 more terms. Wow. That was the limit that I could do. And during that time of being president of the Arkansas Federation of Republican Women, I was also serving on various committees. I had actually started serving on committees with the NFRW just as a club president. It's very common. Women can serve. If you want to serve with the NFRW on their board and work on a committee, it's a great way to get to know the organization at the national level. And Norma tried to make sure I was always plugged in somewhere on one of those committees. And so I had gotten to know the organization, of course, had gone as a delegate and to conventions and such. And that put me on the executive committee for our state party, because we have a very unique relationship in Arkansas, and I really believe it's key to our success. And that is that the Arkansas Federation of Republican Women have our national committee women, as you know, and either our first or second vice, whoever's the female, serve on their exec committee. And the Republican Party of Arkansas has the president of the Arkansas Federation of Republican Women serve on their exec committee. And all of their presidents have a seat on the state committee. Likewise, at our congressional level, our first vice has a vote on the congressional districts. And so we've always been very cohesive, and sometimes it's hard to see where one stops and the other begins, but we are 2 separate entities, and we do operate according to the rules of the party and according to the NFRW and AFRW bylaws. But because of this relationship, it allows our women to move up and to progress within our state party as well. And so when I was finished with being the president of AFRW. It was a few years after that. It was actually, I like to say President Trump and I came into office at the same time. It was President Trump had just won, and there was a position for Arkansas, our secretary that had opened up. So I ran for that and won. And along with that, I had also that same year become the secretary of the NFRW, the National Federation. What's funny about this is, at this point, I had served at almost every level, at a local level. President, treasurer, first vice, whatever was needed. I was always happy to be there. For one thing, it keeps you on the exec committee, so you keep that influence. And again, we were still a very diverse party at that time. And I was very strong, conservative, pro-life, biblical principles. And I felt like the best way to move the party more conservative and to have an influence over the party to be conservative was to be there, to be involved, and to have that voice. And so I always took a position and loved doing it. And so, but I had always said I would not do, there was one position I would never do, and that was secretary.
Oh my goodness. Never say never. The Lord laughs.
Never say never.
The Lord laughs.
And so now I was secretary of the party. Same year, I was secretary of the National Federation of Republican Women. I won both of those seats at the same time.
Oh my goodness.
And I'll skip ahead, just do a little rabbit trail. I ended up being temporarily secretary of our quorum court, which was the greatest burden of all. Now, that was just temporary. I went in, it's a story for another time, but as you know, our party chairman, when he became the first Republican in almost 40 years to be county judge, and the Democrats had hired for 40 years, some of the staff that he was planning on keeping just walked out. And so he found himself very short-staffed and had to hire very quickly. And so I went in as his executive assistant, and one of the ones who quit was our quorum court coordinator, who is our secretary. And so I actually had to take minutes and do their agenda for a period until we were able to hire someone. Wow. So that's a funny story I like to tell people. I always said, and I would say it verbally, I would say it publicly, I'll do anything, just don't ask me to be secretary.
Yeah.
And now I am. And these were all in the same years too. So Joseph won county judge in 2016. So I was elected to be secretary for state organization, national organization, and then county government, all in the
crazy. And secretary is a lot of work. It doesn't sound like it, but it is a lot of work if you do it well. I mean, it's crazy.
It's a lot of work, and you have to, for the state, as you know, it is something that, it has to hold up in court sometimes, unfortunately, and same way with your county government, you have to be, because everything's foiable at the county level, and you're already in a court setting because it's quorum court. It's how you conduct the business of the county. And then for the state, it's how your candidates file. It's how they run for office. So you always have to make sure that you're doing it in a way that can withstand extreme criticism. Now, I had some great trainers. Doyle Webb was our chairman at the time, and he was good. And then people like Ray Cherninky with the National Federation of Republican Women, and many more. Yeah. But so that was, if I look back over everything I've done, I think that was a pivotal moment for me, because it was something I had never intended to do. I wasn't seeking that. I did want to move up in leadership. I love these organizations, still love the party now, but that just wasn't something I was planning on doing. In fact, it intimidated me. It greatly intimidated me to do those two things. It just was not my strength. I would always tend to go to my comfort areas when I would serve, because it's easy to serve in leadership when you're good at it. But these were needs, and it wasn't that I was stepping into something that I couldn't do just because I wanted a position. It was actually a need that needed to be filled. And so that was, I think that it strengthened me and pulled me in a way that let me know one thing I have found about women in all my studying is that women tend to not want to step into leadership or run for office until they feel fully prepared. Yes. But you're never going to feel fully prepared, because we're women. And we're always going to know that we can have a little bit more. But your confidence comes from just getting in there and doing it.
I think that's,
and it's okay.
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, I just want to be sure. I mean, women, yeah, especially young women, need to hear that point, that it's because you're right. Men do it differently. Men are like, yeah, I mean, I may not be qualified. I'm going to try anyways. And women are like, ooh, I don't have a degree in that yet, so I'm not prepared, and they need to jump in. So let's fast forward a little bit, and I will say I must have met you right when you got elected, because I knew you as secretary of the party. I think is the first. And Rita Hamilton, when I joined the Benton County Party, someone had asked me to run for second vice, and Rita called me, and I didn't know who Rita was except for the lady with the red hair, right? And she said, "You need to not be second vice. You need to be secretary." And I was like, "Ooh, I don't want to be secretary. It's a tough job, and I don't think I want to do this." She goes, "That's the job you need." And I was like, "Yes, ma'am. That's the job I need." And so I ran for secretary and won. And I am like, what a great position. Like, as much as it's work, you learn so much about the people in the organization. Just like you said on treasurer, while it's a hard position, it is really a building position. So I was grateful to Miss Rita and her wisdom.
Yeah, well, and to build on that, that's kind of how Rita was with me. And I, I didn't, now it would be hard to do that. It'd be hard to convince young people to take what they would consider a lesser role. And it wasn't that Rita thought, wait your turn, it's that she thought, do this to gain the experience that is going to help you in that next position.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad I listened to Rita and to Norman, to people like them. It prepared me.
Yeah.
It prepared me. And you're so right. That sounds so much, I can just hear Rita saying, you maybe hadn't formally met her.
Yeah.
She was investing and pouring into you.
She was. And I have often looked back and said, that was the best thing she could have done, because I got to know every person. I got to know the organization, and she had such wisdom in it. So I am grateful for that. I am trying to be respectful of your time, and I could talk to you all day. So let's jump to I think, a huge culmination of all your skills and your experience when you made a decision to run for president of the National Federation of Republican Women. What made you feel called to that responsibility? And I know what that race was like. But if you want to touch on that, kind of, let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's one that I do enjoy talking about. I try to be very careful because it was a turbulent time in an organization that I love very much, and I want to be respectful of all parties. Yeah. But up until this point, I had been sought after for these positions, and I had been mentored by wonderful women, and I had been slated with the NFRW, slated for secretary, slated for third vice, second vice, and then fourth vice. So all these times it had been an easy go, and we found ourselves in a time Biden was president, and it was very turbulent times for Christians and for conservatives, and especially for Republicans. And we had a target on our back, and it was genuine fear, and I understood that fear. And we had this 2 years before I ran. We had an issue with convention. Mm-hmm. A man dressed like a woman came and was slated as a delegate. I don't know. I'm sure that national, when you think about it, we have 60,000 members. And when a name comes through, we're just, our bylaws say that it's a women's only organization. You have to be a Republican woman. That has always been in our bylaws. We don't always check these things. A name is a name. It's a women's name. And somehow this man was slated, but it was obvious it was a man. He didn't try to hide it. It ends up that he had even made it an activist type movement in California. As you know, it was the Arkansas women. I was sitting on stage. I didn't even know that this was going on. Hadn't seen many, many people at convention, but it was some of the Arkansas women who stood up and challenged the credentials report. And it was quite shocking. The decision was made to let him stay, I think mainly because we were all confused, wasn't sure that it was exactly what we were hearing from the floor, but it was a man. He was there as a woman, and it had been allowed in his local club and in his state federation. I'm not sure how much the state federation knew, because keep in mind, when you're dealing with thousands of women, these things can come through. It's because it was an activist, he was taking an activist role with it, that it became a big deal for us. But we go on, we begin as a national organization to speak to our attorneys to look at what can we do to prevent this. This individual decided to leave the organization, not because they were offended with us, but from my understanding, they took a position with their job where they could no longer be engaged in politics. So we dodged a bullet, right? We knew of no other. We were on a call with the executive committee, and we were asked, as we're all regional directors of the exec committee, does anyone know of anyone else, any other trans members, any men who are members of the National Federation? Because one thing that we have been told is we just have to be consistent. We have the right to be a women's only organization, but we have to be consistent. This can't change from president to president. Mm-hmm. And it hadn't, because as you know, Mindy, from being a member, the only ones that can change bylaws or policies, bylaws can only be changed at convention, and policies can only be changed at board meetings, but the board policies can never be in conflict with the convention's bylaws. Mm-hmm. So we felt pretty safe. It turns out that there were a few more in a northern state, and they had actually been recruited in. It's not like we had men beating down our door wanting to be full-on members. And we found this out because one of those members, again, made it an issue with the media. They were the first trans running for office, the first trans on, or the first man who had transitioned to a woman who was serving on the board of this state federation. They had even won one of the top most influential LGBTQ members in that state, and they had even been nominated for one of the 4 nominees for Women of the Year. And now they were running against a Republican in a general election. They were still a member, but they had decided to run as an independent, and so that made national news. A lot of our members began to hear about it and became very uncomfortable for the National Federation. And in no way, I want to be very clear, there was no one at the National Federation that wanted to see this individual run against a Republican. And as you know, we have very strict bylaws that you can't challenge a Republican in a general election. In the general election, we all come together. So there were many bylaw violations with this. We handled this internally. I was not one that wanted to tear down an organization I loved. We wanted to handle it internally. I felt like that we're all about empowering women and getting them to step up and run for office. How can we do that if we can't define what a woman is? And we had a lot of conservative organizations wanting to know, what does NFRW think? Can you define what a woman is? A lot of the conservative media outlets, Daily Wire, Daily Caller, they were beginning to hear about this. They wanted us to take a stand. And there was some legitimate fear of, if we're sued, an organization, we were seeing this happen all across the country, people being sued. We might not financially be able to weather this storm. My position was, we're not going to exist if we don't take a stand. If the Republican women can't just stand up and define what a woman is, what are we doing? We may as well just be part of the party and not be Republican women. It's like the college Republicans. You have to be in college. The YRs, you have to be under 41. We do these things to reach a demographic of voters. If you know anything, and I did write a book about NFRW and Republican women while I was in office. And if you go all the way back to our founding, and it's in that book, the whole thought behind starting the National Federation of Republican Women came from the Republican Party. They hired a national committee woman from Maine to travel around and to organize the women, because the idea was, is if you could, whichever party could get the edge and could engage the women, then they would have the edge in each election. So our purpose for starting was for women, by women, and to increase women in politics. And that's still our mission today. And so we were getting away from our mission when we were becoming, it was almost like, even though it was just 1 or 2 members, we were being hijacked by something that really did not represent the majority of our members. And so it came time, as you know how we do our elections, we start with the slate, and we elect 7 women from across the country to get together to review and sometimes interview and look over resumes and come out. I like to call it, it's a high-powered endorsement. Because they don't pick our next leadership, but very rarely do we challenge the slate. Very rarely do we challenge the nominating committee. And so these women are great women. We just saw some things differently, at least 4 of them. And in fact, keep in mind, it only takes 4 of 7 to pick the leadership for the organization for the next 2 years. And so I knew I could sense, there were never any harsh words ever with any of these women, but I could sense that where they were on this particular issue. And so I told my family, it was one Sunday at a restaurant. I think about every time I pass that restaurant, I said, look, it's not likely I'm going to be slated, but I'm considering running regardless. And my son, Nathaniel, Nathaniel, he's a Politico. He said, Mom, boy, it's hard to beat a slate. And he would know.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah. But Nathaniel, I have pulled so many women into this organization. And I have 6 grandchildren, 6 granddaughters. If I just kind of quietly go away because I'm not slated, because I would have. If this wasn't the issue, I probably would have, to be honest with you. But if I just quietly go away, what message does that send? I did nothing. And at least if I'm out there running, I'm telling them where my position is, and that is somewhat documented. Nobody wants to be the candidate that runs just to spread truth. You've been a candidate. You're in it to win. Mm-hmm. But it was not likely, And so the slate came out, and they waited for some reason. They waited a couple of weeks. They notified us, that those of us who hadn't been selected, and then they waited several weeks before they announced the slate, and that gave me a couple of weeks head start. So I like to say I did not get the high-powered endorsement, but I did get our Governor Sarah Sanders endorsement. Senator Cotton, Riley Gaines, and so many more.
Yeah.
And so we went out there and we ran. Sometimes the truth feels negative, but I felt like it was a pretty clean campaign all the way around. It's never without its emotions, but we didn't tear down the organization, neither of us, neither side. One of the things that I feel like was very helpful to me when I stepped out there to run, there was another woman, Martha Jenkins, who called me and said, if you're going to run from the floor, I'm going to run with you. I want to run for first vice. Then we had a secretary come forward and say, I'm going to run for secretary. And then before the convention came around, we even had a second vice. And so Martha has just became our president. So she came after me. We have Karen Newton, who was second vice under me, and she's now first vice for Martha. And our secretary has become the treasurer. That's awesome. That's kind of the story. We weathered that storm, and winning has elections have consequences, even when you win, because now we have to pull everyone back in. We're about growing, and so we couldn't afford to lose those who didn't agree with us. And so we did. Maybe with the exception of a few, most people came back around.
Yeah. Well, and that is a big task, right? We even see that within regular elections. If we have a really heated primary in the state, sometimes it's very hard to get people back together for that general. So let's talk about your time, and we are getting short on time, so I apologize. But let's talk a little bit about the organization under your presidency. Are there, you had a big year, right? You had a presidential convention year. So it was pretty exciting. Are there any accomplishments that stand out for you during the time that you served?
Yeah, I think number one is getting to serve one under Biden and one under President Trump. And I can say we stayed the busiest under President Trump. Yeah. But we were really into the grassroots. I mean, we embraced that because that's what we do. And so we had strike forces in all of the battleground states. We raised money to help pay for lodging and housing. And we narrowed down the issues we were going to champion to 2. We looked at nationally what Americans cared about. It was the economy and the border. And that was the only thing we spoke about. Many honorable issues, many special interest groups wanted us to take on their issue, but if we had 30 seconds on the doorstep, we wanted to connect with that voter. And so we made it about the economy, and we made it about the border, and we were successful. We had a record turnout of women going door to door. One of the things I would say is my greatest accomplishment is when we stood at convention And we had Alliance Defending Freedom took us on and helped us get some great language for our bylaws to strengthen our biological truth, to make sure our bylaws had that in there. And, I thought, I don't know how this is going to be received. It was not even a question, didn't even debate it. It was passed in a block with other bylaws. And so leaving that and making our bylaws even more solid on that issue, to me, is the greatest accomplishment that I leave behind.
That is fantastic. And so kind of last question, well, maybe two last questions. What advice would you give to a woman listening who's considering getting involved but doesn't quite know where to start?
So I would say so women are natural leaders. Are out there already leading, this in their home and in their homeschooling or in their public schools or Christian schools or churches, already leading. And like we touched on earlier, don't wait until you feel 100% ready. Just get in there. I would start with your local Republican women, just like you and I started. That's a great place to start. I would start with your local committee. I would look up people such as the Leadership Institute have a great women's program. I'm helping them develop their curriculum. Heather Sellers is the director and leading that charge there. But the best place is right at your local level. So start with your local Republican women, look at your school board, look at your city council, look at places in the local party that need you to step in and help, like you did, like I did. That's the best place. Don't wait until you're 100% ready, and don't wait until you feel like you have all the time you need.
Yes, just bring those babies with you. Yeah,
yep.
That's what we did. I know that's what you did. Okay, so last question. What comes next for you? I mean, you served as the president of this ginormous national organization, NFRW. Kind of, where do you go from here?
Well, I'm still figuring that out. But one thing that I'm currently working on that is definitely in my wheelhouse, and I love doing it, is I'm helping LI develop their curriculum. As you know, Heather Sellers is leading the Women in Leadership program. And so they started that originally with Riley Gaines, and then she's gone on to do great things, other things. And so Heather picked up the mantle and carried it on, but they were wanting some curriculum, some things that Heather could implement to do exactly what you just asked, get women engaged, not only in elected leadership, but also in corporate America and in party leadership. And so I'm developing the curriculum. I'm helping Heather know what would be effective to get these women educated and trained.
That is fantastic. So women can go to nfrw.org, I get that right, to kind of find where their local club is. And then the name of your book is?
From Run to Redemption, How the Republican Women Rebuilt the Party After Its Worst Defeat. You can get that through NFRW.
Perfect. Also on that same website.
Yep.
Excellent. Julie, thank you so much for joining me today. I have just so enjoyed our conversation. It's been great to catch up with you. You've been so busy the last couple of years that it's fun to have a little time to sit and chat with you. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today with Julie Harris. She's served as all different positions within the Arkansas Republican Party and Arkansas Federation of Republican Women, but her most recent position was as the president of the National Federation of Republican Women, which is one of the most influential grassroots organizations in American politics. She has been influential at all levels. She has brought more women into the party, and she has really changed the face of Republican women in America. So I hope you've enjoyed that conversation and look forward to seeing you next week in the arena.